What's up? Not a car guy here, and today I will be troubleshooting a squeaky brake. Recently, I moved from Washington State all the way to Central Texas, and on my way, as I was coming out of the hills into Fort Collins, Colorado, I noticed a pretty nasty squeak as I was coming to a stop. The squeak pretty much persisted all the way to Texas, and even after I got here and have been living here for a few months. However, on the day of shooting this video, my brakes decided not to squeak, so I can't show you. I'm still going to walk through a checklist of what you would look for if you were going to troubleshoot a squeaky brake for yourself. Now, upon initial inspection, I think I know what it is. As you can see, my caliper bracket is extremely rusted, and whether or not that is the source of the squeak, I definitely want to take care of that because it looks so terrible. As usual, crack the lugs, put the car in the air, place the jack stand, and take the wheels off. See what I have to deal with? I'm already just dripping sweat. Texas is so hot. Once you take the wheel off, you'll get a better look at your brake system. And we're gonna take a look at this brake system in the three different parts. You got the caliper, the rotor, and the brake pads. Now, upon first inspection, like I said, this piece jumps out at me. It's very rusted, and a lot of that rust can break off and get in between the pads and the rotor and just cause some squeak. But the first thing that I would do after you get the wheel off is just spray it down with brake clean and eliminate any brake dust that might be built up over time. Now, most of the problems are probably going to occur in the brake pads themselves. In order to get to the brake pads, you got to take the caliper off. You got two 12mm bolts on the outside, and two 15mm bolts on the body of the caliper. Consider getting some caliper hangers if you don't have any. So one of the things on the list is the brake pad hardware lubrication, and as you can see, this thing is filthy. There's just a bunch of gunk and crud built up, and there's really not much grease going on there, so that's definitely something I'm going to do, is just clean up this hardware and hit it with some grease. The other thing that you want to look at on the brake pad is if there's any uneven wear on the pad, but this one actually looks pretty straight. I don't think that's much of a concern, but if there's uneven brake pad wear, then you're not going to apply force against the brake pad equally, so it's going to kind of wobble and perhaps cause a vibration or a noise from doing that. The other thing you want to take a look at is how much brake pad material is there, and there's plenty for now. I'm definitely getting closer to needing new brake pads, but one thing to look for is you've got this footing here, and if it kind of goes below to where you don't have any more footing, that's a good indicator that it's time to get some new brake pads. Also, these are ceramic, but if you have non-ceramic brake pads, sometimes the more metallic ones can cause some squeaky sound. So make sure to get yourself some quality brake pads if your brakes are squeaking. So one thing to be aware of is that on the outside of your brake pad is a shim, and it's a metal piece with with a covering. And as you can see, my caliper wore through that covering down to the metal, and that can actually cause a squeak when it rubs against it. There are actually metal shims that you can buy for your brake pads, and actually just put them on the outside and switch them out when you change your brake pads every time. Another consideration is the edges of your brake pads can be sharp, and that might actually stick and rub against the rotor. But one thing you can do to remedy that is just take some sandpaper and lightly round off the edges so it no longer does that. As far as the caliper goes, just make sure that the slider pins are well lubricated. If the slider pins aren't lubricated, the caliper will start to stick and drag. Also, check your rotors for warping on the surface. My rotors are in pretty good shape, so there's no concern there. And check your rotors for excessive grooves. Usually if this happens, it's because the brake pads are worn down way too low, and you would have heard a grinding of the metal into your rotor if that were the case. One thing that I noticed is there seems to be some smearing or pitting that kind of suggests that there was a material on the brake pad at some time, and I'm guessing that's probably just the rust that fell down in between the rotor and the brake pad and caused some squeaky sounds. To start off, I'm just going to take soapy water and a microfiber towel and scratch that. I'm going to use a Scott's towel. I think I'll try out some Armor All wipes. Get into those grooves. I'm not really looking for perfection. It's just there was so much buildup on these. It would be a good idea to clean it off. Looks much better. And I'm gonna hit them with some isopropyl alcohol. I should probably be wearing gloves, but I'm too stubborn, as you might know if you've seen any of my other videos. Also, you should just clean off this crud here. All this gunk. We're gonna re-grease these. Alright, now for the fun part. I'm going to actually address the rust issue on my brackets. And what I'm gonna do is well, I thought I had wire brushers, but I don't. But I do have some sandpaper, so I'm going to sand down all the rust, and then I'll hit it with some brake clean and some isopropyl alcohol to prep it before I decide to primer it. So I'm going to do 3 coats of primer, 3 coats of high temperature paint, black, and then yeah, maybe I'll hit it with a gloss if I feel like it. I do have some. Alright, so I have some sandpaper here. It's 180 grit. I'm not going to pretend like I know anything about grits of sandpaper, but there was a car on the cover, so I must be in the right neighborhood. So I'm going to sand all of this down, but one thing to just watch out for is to not mess up the rubber boots. You don't want to damage those. Yeah, already there's a lot being taken off of there just by sanding it. Now we're going to hit it with the alcohol. So now I'm going to mask off some areas, particularly the boots with the slider pins. Probably cover up these holes. I don't necessarily want to get paint in the screw holes. It's not the worst thing, but just want to protect those. And then I want to make sure that these surfaces here are actually, you can still get the clips in just fine. And I'm honestly, I hate masking. This is definitely not something I enjoy, so I'm probably not going to do a super terrific job at this. Alright, so now that we've got our caliper brackets all cleaned up, got the rust knocked off and all that, and we're ready to paint, I'm going to hit it with this primer first. And so I'm going to shake this can for like 30 seconds, and then we'll do 2 light coats followed by a medium coat with 10 minutes to set in between. Now that we've primered, I'm gonna hit it with the black paint. We're gonna do the same thing, 2 light coats followed by a medium coat, give it 10 minutes in between each coat. And then after this, we'll think about doing a gloss. So I opted not to go with the gloss coat after all. Reason being is I don't actually want it to have a shiny appearance. I've got some black rims I'm going to be putting on my car, and I don't really want the shiny black rims and the shiny caliper. I just kind of want it to sit in the background and not look rusty. After the paint is dried, it's time to put your brakes back together. You can start with the hardware. Just place the clips in the only way that they'll fit. Just keep trying. You'll get it. After they're securely in place, grease all 4 channels of the hardware. It's easiest to spread the grease with your fingers. You might as well grease the ends of the brake pads too. Take the caliper mounting bracket and mount it. Clean the rotor in case you got any grease on it. Now insert the brake pads. Take the other part of the caliper and place it over the brake pads. It's probably going to need a little persuasion. I would advise against compressing the piston to make it fit easier, because the piston extends as the brake material wears down, and you want to keep that relationship the same. Make sure to tighten down the bolts before you put the wheel back on. And now the caliper looks much better than a bucket of rust. The paint and primer will also help prevent the caliper from further rusting, hopefully. Whew! It is hot. Alright, that's it. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. Remember, I'm not a car guy, but I will be. Giddy up!